What does it take to give a country the political will?
Trust is another key piece of the puzzle here.
What do you think will happen to Canada's economic competitiveness in the next decade?
I fear it would be detrimental for Canada.
Welcome to the Functional Government Podcast. After learning about Canada's stalled attempts to modernize individual tax filing, it was time to find out how the rest of the world does it. So we reached out to Dr. Fabrizio Santoro, an economist who's the research lead for the Institute of Development Studies, DPI, and Tax Research Program. Fabrizio is the person countries call when they want to set up tax systems. He's studied how multiple African countries' modernization efforts have advanced, overcoming regulatory, technical, and cultural issues to simplify their income tax. Some, like Uganda, have implemented online registration, enrollment, and automatic filing. We also wanted his perspective on Canada's system and the idea that North American for-profit companies promise taxpayers the return they deserve, implying that there's a way to somehow negotiate a tax obligation, which is really a direct result of complex tax codes and mistrust in government. In this second functional government segment on taxation, here's my conversation with Fabrizio. Hi, Fabrizio. Where are you joining us from today?
Hello, Alistair. I'm joining from Barcelona, Spain.
Fantastic. So you've been studying tax systems around the world for a long time right now. Can you tell folks, just for context, what you've been doing to understand tax systems and why taxation?
Thanks, Alistair. Yes, a great question. I've been doing this job for 8 years now. I'm a tax researcher, meaning that I work with African governments. I work specifically in Africa. And what we do is basically we use our technical expertise to inform their policy making on anything related to tax system and tax policy. We try to help them raise revenues in a smarter, more efficient way, revenues that then would be essential to fund development and growth.
When you talk to colleagues from around the world who study tax, places in Europe or in Africa, about their tax systems, what do they tell you about how long it takes their citizens to file taxes?
Yes, that's a very urgent issue, the time it takes to comply with the tax regulations and tax obligations. We definitely have abundant evidence from Africa. These are contexts with high illiteracy rates, with many practical challenges for taxpayers in navigating a tax system. It could definitely be a stressful experience for them. It's also true that in many African countries, many African governments are doing their best in facilitating the experience that the taxpayers have when interfacing a tax system, with the hope that through facilitation, and technology is a piece of this, they would comply better.
What's the best sort of practices here? Like if you're going in and helping a country implement new tax policies, where do you borrow from? Where do you get your inspiration from for systems that have been shown to work?
A great question, Alistair. It's definitely difficult to make a system that worked well, a solution that worked well in Scandinavia, make it travel all the way to Rwanda or Uganda. So we tend to be up to date with any innovations taking place in other regions of the world. But when it comes to Africa, there are certain context-specific factors that we have to take into account. And we usually first diagnose the needs. We assess the problems in given tax administration, and we try to come up with solutions or policy recommendations that fit those specific needs.
So when I've looked at some of the Scandinavian countries who seem to be leading the world in terms of speed and simplicity of filing, they talk about it taking like 3 to 5 minutes to file your taxes. And everybody hears that. Obviously, we're talking about this because other countries, particularly Canada, have much more challenging tax situations. When someone says like 3 to 5 minutes to file in a Scandinavian country, for example, does that include reviewing information, preparing documentation, or is it just like clicking a button? Give me some context for what it's like in Scandinavia before we talk about what can be applied to other countries.
Yes, I'm not an expert on Scandinavian tax systems, but from what I know, everything is quite fast and immediate. I think that refers to the time it takes to file your returns online, where information around your economic activities is already pre-filled through very sophisticated data sharing across institutions and private actors in the country. So I believe you still have to spend some time in keeping your books right and up to date. But then, of course, when it comes to file your returns, you would have all your information pre-filled. You should just check if everything looks all right and approve, confirm, and you're done. Otherwise, of course, you can amend. That would take a bit more minute. But I think, yes, it's the time it takes to file.
So the employer is doing this work throughout the year to submit information on how much they paid their employees or how much tax was withheld from purchases. They're doing that throughout the year, and then that's stored anyway. And so come tax time, you're just confirming it. Is that right?
Yes, there are some savings in time and effort throughout the year, because I believe that once the employer transmits, communicates all the relevant information to the designated agency, step is now done, is done once throughout the year, and then that information is used at a later stage in a quite smart way, because tax administration has access to that data already. So there is no repetition of tasks that, of course, would create frustration.
So when you're talking to African countries or other nations that are in the process of building a tax system or digital tools, where are the obstacles? Because obviously the immediate problem is, well, not everyone has access to the technology, but it seems like there are many other things like having a mature system where businesses are filing employment income. So where does the system break down that prevents it from being that easy in the countries you're working with?
Fresh from a review on this topic across several African countries together with the World Bank. And yes, we map the key challenges in implementing a successful digital reforms. For sure, there are factors related to basic infrastructure, internet connectivity or access to digital devices, institutional level challenges within the tax administration and within the government as a whole, challenges with I call it the human factor, challenges with people. This could be taxpayers and tax officials, which are part of the picture because they have to work with technology as well. Challenges with the regulatory background, with the regulations enabling usage of a given technology. And then lastly, especially in low-income countries, challenges with funding. Technology is costly, especially introducing it and keeping up to date.
So I'm being selfish here, but I'm asking about Canada. We clearly don't have a problem with connectivity. Most Canadians have access to digital infrastructure pretty readily. We don't really have a problem with the understanding of the tax system and sort of literacy around taxation. It seems like Canada's problems are similar to the problems you're addressing in Africa in regards to the administrative human factors, but also in regards to the collection systems and how well the different parts of the government work together. Let's go into those in a little more detail. First of all, let's talk about the human factors, both the taxpayer and also the administrator. What are the challenges for human factors for countries in Africa that are building or revitalizing or modernizing their tax system?
One of the main goals of tax systems and tax policy is to be inclusive. The idea is then when a new technological solutions is introduced, it should operate at scale. It should reach as many taxpayers as possible. That's quite difficult to put in place. We mapped a quite consistent digital divide between users and non-users of digital solutions like electronic filing or electronic payment of taxes across very different contexts in Africa, from Francophone West Africa to East Africa. The usual patterns emerge where less educated taxpayers, often female taxpayers without bank accounts or without a tax canon, smaller taxpayers in rural areas, they're less likely to take up a new technology. It's a common challenge, but again, governments are doing, I think, something quite remarkable in trying to bridge this gap. Just to give you an example, in Uganda, a simplified taxpayer registration solution was introduced that would just use your ID number and pull all your information from the National ID Agency. And this solution that just asked for one specific piece of information from yourself enabled tax administration to reach underserved communities, especially in the rural areas, female taxpayers or younger taxpayers. In Rwanda or Eswatini, for instance, where digital tax filing is compulsory for everyone, well, for those that don't know how to use it, the governments offer assistance from people, from staff. So there are tax officials that are there welcoming and assisting taxpayers which are unable to navigate technology.
I just want to dive into those because you said two interesting things. So in Uganda, digital filing is a reality, and the citizen, the taxpayer, enters one piece of information that allows the government to then produce a tax return and calculate the tax obligation. Is that right?
It's more about registration with the tax system. So even registration, it could be a quite cumbersome task for taxpayers. They have to show up to the office, to the headquarters, travel a long way, and bring lots of papers, right? But in Uganda, thanks to interinstitutional collaboration, in Ghana as well, by the way, in many other African countries, now leveraging ID information helps streamline the taxpayer registration process.
So let me understand. I'm a Ugandan citizen. I know I have to pay taxes. If I don't have access to technology, someone will help me. But if I do, I now register using my digital ID. What do I then need to do to pay my annual income tax?
Exactly. So basically, in Uganda, there is an online registration platform where you're simply asked to include your ID number, and all your personal information is pulled by the national ID database. You don't have to fill the form again. And that, of course, helps tax administration have consistent data, information about yourself across different data sets, right? And then, of course, there is an onboarding process. Every new registered taxpayers goes through an onboarding process, receives assistance and guidance on how to file. There is an electronic filing platform, and then we move to the filing aspect.
And did the country build the electronic filing platform, or was it built by someone like Intuit, or is it something they built themselves? Or
that's a very good question, because the way in which a digital solution is designed and introduced matter also in terms of impacts. We didn't do much work on that. We just have anecdotal evidence. And we know that, yes, countries like Uganda, Rwanda, Nigeria, for instance, with some pride, I would say, they managed to design their own solution that fits their own needs without buying it off the shelves.
so the government has a portal that it built. As a citizen, you register with your digital ID. You provide some contextual information into that portal. If you don't have access to digital tools, someone will help you. And then you use a government website. And what information do you put into that website? And what information does the government already have in, say, Uganda?
For sure, the tax administration has information about your profile, which is already something. It's already a lot, especially in contexts like tax administration in Africa, where it's very difficult to locate individuals. I'm not sure of the extent of filling of information that's happening there in Uganda specifically, but I know, for instance, that in Rwanda, data from electronic fiscal devices, on which, by the way, African governments are really pushing on in terms of implementation, is widely used for cross-checking what you declare in terms of sales when it's time to declare for income tax or VAT. So everything that's reported from your electronic fiscal device is automatically transmitted to the tax administration, which then it's used as a benchmark.
So if I'm a merchant, a small business, and I'm using some kind of payment tool like a Stripe or whatever, but whatever's local in that market, that tool is also sending information to the tax authorities. Is that right?
I wish it was that way. In some other contexts beyond Africa, I think about Brazil or India, the private sector banks have managed to reach agreements with tax administration through which they share transaction level data from merchants. In Africa, we are still a bit behind. There are important governance, regulatory issues. That data is still not shared freely automatically. What is shared is data from electronic fiscal devices, which are fiscal tools.
Okay. So if you have a physical payment device, that thing is registered with the government somehow and shares the data. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And what about personal income? Like if I'm paid by an employer and is the employer deducting tax at source for me? How does that work?
That works exactly as it works in high-income countries. It works quite well. Data is automatically transmitted to tax administration. Tax is withheld at source. Personal income tax is largely underperforming in Africa and low-income countries.
When you say underperforming, you mean people are not participating in it?
It could be better. Most of it comes from the example you just made, salaried income, because there is that automatic sort of enforcement through withholding, right? But when it comes to other individuals, other professionals, which still have to self-declare, where there's more room for evasion there.
So let me ask the big question that I think everybody wants an answer to. And I want you to take a moment to think about this because this is the really big question. European countries have traditionally had an easier time with filing because the government knows what people earned. Thinking about all the countries where the citizen has to fill their own tax forms and provide their own data as opposed to the government doing it, how much of the inability to modernize the tax system is because the citizens want to cheat on their taxes?
Yes, that's a great question, I have to say, which also makes me think about research opportunities.
Because it does seem like that's the big thing. When people, you just said it's the gray market, it's people who don't want to declare, it's cash, it's all those other things, that when you have a system where all income is properly tracked, there's no evasion. But the motivation, what you hear, there's only two motivations I've come across. One is the people who make money with tax preparation, which is a $12.2 billion industry in North America, don't want it to change. Like they want, you'd have to pay for software, right? And the other is people want to cheat on their taxes. Otherwise, you could have a simpler system that would be less annoying for everyone. But it feels like it's a very small slice of people in a society who want to cheat on their taxes. But they're holding the rest of us hostage and making us have to go through an entire weekend of collecting receipts and telling the government what it already knows. That seems like a big contradiction.
That's a very interesting angle, also for research purposes. There's strong evidence showing how the more taxpayers have room to self-declare their income, the more evasion is there. I believe technology definitely help tax administration monitor compliance and detect evasion. Still, we have evidence again from Africa that even if you introduce the latest state-of-the-art digital solution, taxpayers, especially self-reporting their income, would find way to avoid taxes. There are always loopholes around, which taxpayers tend to also with the help of tax accountants would find ways to go around it. This is especially true in Africa, where the capacity of tax administration in detecting and enforcing compliance is not optimal, even when technology is there. Taxpayers know that. They know that even if they file through a digital tool electronically, the tax administration will never catch them. So they will keep doing the same. We have significant evidence about the strategic responses of some categories of taxpayers, as you said. And then, of
what
course,
percentage of the citizens would you say fall into those categories of taxpayers?
Yes, I mean, we don't have the actual figure, even if we should probably look into the data.
But these do seem to be the salient questions that nobody wants to talk about. Like, it's a small number of people who want to get away with gray market stuff and not pay what they owe the society they're a part of. And they're holding the rest of society responsible for, preparing their own taxes and funding private companies rather than having a system that just works. Like in England, there's no tax season. Find out what you paid for most citizens.
Indeed, there is a world in which self-declaration coexists with digital, right? Probably it's a matter of culture, of vested interests, of regulation. I am not that up to date to the...
No, I think you got the right list. Culture, self-interest, and regulation. Those are it's what we are used to. It's what we can get away with. And it's what we must do by law. Those are the three levers, it seems. So I want to make sure we're clear here. You're an expert on African tax law. And so we've said Africa a few times, but this is very different, right, across different countries. You mentioned Ghana and Rwanda and Uganda. What's the spectrum like? Which country is like the furthest ahead? Which country is really not doing any form of income tax right now?
There is extreme heterogeneity in the African continent, as you just said. Definitely countries like Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, of course, Ghana, Nigeria are leading in the digital reform journey. They are showing the way to the other countries. There is lots of willingness to learn from peers. Solutions that work well in Rwanda, for instance, electronic fiscal devices, are now being adapted to Zambia, for instance, or to Ghana as well. There's lots of sharing of know-how. There are countries, especially post-conflict situations, where it's extremely difficult for tax administration to function, but for the government as a whole as well.
So I remember reading somewhere that one of the reasons that Africa adopted mobile technology so quickly was it didn't really have good landline infrastructure. And at the same time, America adopted chip and pin banking cards late because it had such a good digital like signing on the carbon copy credit card model. So in Africa, there has been, and I'm not sure everybody knows this, a much greater adoption of wireless technology and mobile devices than there have been in other countries. That happened sooner. And so have they kind of leapfrogged some of the existing systems because they're building things relatively recently?
You got it right, Alistair. Leapfrogging is the correct word here. I think I just told you about Africa in terms of digital solutions for tax lives in a context of an already quite well connected and digitalized society and economy. It's remarkable the pace at which digital solutions go in countries like Rwanda compared to the first time I went there 8 years ago. Now it's a totally different place. Mobile money is the most common way of paying for things, of sending and receiving money, paying school bills or waste collection fees, parking spots. Everything is paid through mobile money, which is an African-born success story. And yes, I'm not exactly sure about the origins of mobile money, but it must be related to those infrastructural barriers. Africa totally leapfrogged when it comes to digital financial services, and they're doing the same now when it comes to paying taxes digitally. It's embedded in their habits, in their culture. It's a young generations of people that are very familiar with mobile money. You can pay taxes from all around the country, in rural areas as well, at any time, in a safe and transparent way.
Okay, so you've studied tax systems across Africa, and obviously you know something about Europe and developing countries elsewhere. In your experience, thinking about all the countries in the world, is Canada's approach of having citizens manually transcribe information that the government already has considered normal or unusual?
I'm not that familiar with the Canadian context, but from what you tell me, that process is definitely outdated and unusual, and it should not be the norm. Every time there is a manual process, especially if living in parallel with a digital one, that creates room for inaccuracies, repetitions, duplications, errors, intentional or unintentional mistakes. All that creates inefficiencies and frustration because the whole experience is more cumbersome, takes more time, and of course, taxpayers, they're not encouraged to
I want to make sure I don't put words in your mouth, but what I think you just said was compared to the rest of the world, including the developing countries you work with, Canada's system is outdated.
Electronic filing and payment of taxes has been mandated in Rwanda since 2015. And in other countries, the same story. In Eswatini, especially during the pandemic, in Eswatini mandated electronic filing 2021, Uganda, Ghana. Digital is the only way to file and pay taxes. Of course, there are exceptions, but they are just exceptions. The norm is that you have to file through the online platforms. So yes.
And is Nigeria like that?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so just to be clear, one of the criticisms that people often have when we say government should be modernized in Canada is, oh, those Nordic countries like Estonia with 1.4 million people, we have 30 million, we can't possibly do that. I think the last time I looked, the population of Nigeria was around 230 million people. Is that right?
Yeah.
And they've got mandatory digital filing.
Uganda is also much bigger than Canada in terms of population.
In your work, you've seen lots of countries transition from paper-based systems to digital ones, right? And from systems where the citizens have to self-report, if at all, to a system where reporting is automatic because they already have the information provided. In 2025 of this year, our tax system crashed. And it forced citizens to go back to manual processing. Does that sound like the kind of thing that happens in developed countries' tax infrastructure? Or is this the kind of thing that happens in developing nations that don't have digital infrastructure? Like how reliable and how often does these digital systems break in the countries that are implementing
Good point. Yes, I think earlier I mentioned that basic infrastructure can be an obstacle to successful digital reforms. And in that bucket, I put also weak technological system. So yes, it happens. Routinely in African countries that, especially during the peak times when it's time to declare for everyone, the system gets stuck.
And how do they deal with the system getting stuck? Because it's digital, so you can't just make more copies of the paper.
The idea is to immediately acknowledge that and ask and propose a longer period for filing and paying taxes. Usually a couple of weeks is given as an extension. Because the unfair consequences there is that if you miss the deadline, then automatically penalties kick in. And so, of course, that would create social protests and such.
For
So the
sure.
idea is to give deadline extensions, yes.
So let's talk about Rwanda specifically before we move on. Rwanda is a country that is recovering from a genocide, horrible genocide 30 years ago, but it seems to have more reliable digital tax filing systems than Canada right now. What does that tell you about the political priorities? And that's not a gotcha question. What I mean is, when we look at Estonia, they rebuilt their digital government because they had to in order to get away from the Soviet state because they didn't trust government. Rwanda is obviously trying to put together a country after a horrible, horrible strife. And so they had to move fast on these things. Whereas in Canada, there's not a lot of political will to modernize digital government. Does it take some kind of crisis or unifying moment or national ideal? Like, if you, in your opinion, and I recognize this is an only opinion, what does it take to give a country the political will to fix these things and modernize outdated infrastructure? Is there something across the countries you've seen that has made some of those countries in Africa willing to do the hard work and maybe challenge what a few vocal people criticize and so on and get it done anyway?
So I believe the key priority for most African countries is to collect adequate tax revenues to build schools, hospitals, infrastructure. And if you take Rwanda, that was exactly the case 30 years ago where the country got destroyed. It's also a period of multiple crises, the one we live now. Think about the AIDS crisis, public debt crisis, climate crisis. African governments desperately needs revenue, and they realized that digital solutions can help unlock huge revenue gains if done
So
properly.
is a digital solution shown to improve tax compliance and tax receipts and so on?
Yes, absolutely. Especially, in my research center, we produced abundant evaluations of electronic filing, electronic payment, taxes, electronic fiscal devices. There is often a positive, strong response in terms of income tax collected or VAT raised, with some caveats, of course.
So you listed three things that were sort of big obstacles: culture, self-interest, and governance, non-technical things, right? Culture meaning, have we always done it this way? Self-interest meaning, do I benefit from not doing stuff? And governance meaning what the rules are. It seems like those are the things that a country had to overcome, but they're also the things that digital seems to fix.
There is a nice interplay there, I would say. And that's, again, if I think about Rwanda, thanks to political will and a national vision, the culture nowadays is one in which technology plays a key role. And the idea is to become a digital hub in 30 years, attracting foreign investors and business.
Oh, interesting. So they've tied public sector modernization and digital government
Absolutely.
to economic stability, additional investment, growth, and national sovereignty and things like that.
Absolutely. And it's a government culture. It's a vision, an agenda. We are talking about taxes, but countries like Rwanda, they modernized and digitalized all government services more or less at the same pace.
How long did it take them to do that?
Well, I would say probably a couple of decades, 20 years to reach the current state.
So they started in like 2005 and they're kind of making progress to mostly digital now.
Yeah, exactly. The electronic filing platform was made mandatory in 2015, which was already in place years before. The government service platform Irembo, which is an amazing success story, has been around for more than 10 years as well.
What's the platform called?
Irembo.
Is Irembo something that is on mobile phones, like people install it on their phone?
Absolutely.
Do you have any idea what percentage of the population has it on their phone?
Not really, but I know from anecdotal evidence that it's ubiquitous.
So like if I get a new phone and I install a browser and I install my bank or whatever, I install Ubembo on the phone as well.
Yeah, they have apps, of course. They have physical kiosks all around the countries with person trying to help you access services online, try to teach you, raising awareness, sensitization, campaigns, all that.
Did they contract with like external development companies to build it, or was it like a government open source, kind of like what DIA did in Ukraine and stuff?
So Irembo is a clear example of what we call digital public infrastructure, which is a new way of reframing digital solutions where government and private actors work together, where there is, of course, government oversight to make sure that the solution is inclusive and accessible, but also the private sector technological know-how and vibrant sort of skills.
So You mentioned that that was a good investment for a country. I know in the UK, the Making Tax Digital program cost them 1.3 billion pounds, but they report that it's generated 6.4 billion pounds. Is it a good ROI? Like, what's the return on investment for building digital public infrastructure for taxation like this?
Yeah, great question, Alistair. We don't have exact figures on ROIs yet. What we can say, again, thinking about African governments, after an initial big investment, there are definitely benefits and returns across all sorts of outcomes, not just in terms of extra revenues, but in terms of new approaches, new processes, more transparent relationship with taxpayers and citizens. This is a much wider benefits, which in turn, of course, would spur compliance, would spur revenue, would make tax administration able to raise more revenue more efficiently. If done properly, these digital reforms can definitely unlock higher revenues.
So the other, maybe smaller elephant in the room than not filing digitally with what the government knows lets you cheat on your taxes, which is a pretty salacious big elephant. The other elephant in the room, I think, is around the complexity of the tax code. When you're a new country or you've gone through a regime change, you have a chance to rewrite the laws from scratch. When you are a country that's been around for a long time and it uses common law, the historical law becomes very big. So Canada's tax code, when it was first written in 1917, was 6 pages long, and it's now 1,412 pages. That was in 2016. What does the complexity of the tax code do to the effectiveness of the tax system in that country? And is it the fact that African countries have had like a tax code reset when they're building these things that makes them able to make such huge gains in like 10 years?
The complexity of the tax system is definitely a key driver of tax compliance. It directly influences the perception taxpayers have of the tax system, of the tax administration as an institution, and of the government as a whole. It also expands beyond tax administrations. We have made lots of evidence, lots of work, lots of research in Africa showing how teaching taxpayers through trainings, group trainings in Rwanda, or through sending emails, SMSs, or even physical letters with informative material to taxpayers, again, in Eswatini, in Uganda, in Ethiopia, works in improving compliance. It's all about raising awareness, improving knowledge of the tax system. Ignorance could also work in both directions, right? So it could be an excuse for evading taxes or
you could say
taxes.
It's not my fault, it was too complex, I didn't know. Yeah. What about trust? I mean, when people put a tax system in place, you resent the government if it taxes you. But when the tax system works quickly and efficiently, have you found that increases or decreases trust in government in that country?
Trust is another key piece of the puzzle here. It correlates with the perceived complexity of the tax system. We have, survey data evidence from Africa showing that these two factors correlates, and it also correlates with technology, with digital solutions. The experience you have with a given digital tool then determines how easy it is to comply. So your compliance burden, which in turn affects how fair do you think the whole business is, right? In cases where technology failed, taxpayers would resent it, would be extremely frustrated. There is also an equity aspect there by which less equipped taxpayers, low-income taxpayers are often those that experience a regressive burden and costs. And so they suffer more in terms of from any technological failures. So yes, a specific digital solutions is meant to facilitate compliance, reducing the complexity and the experience with the goal of building trust, building transparency in taxpayers.
When you consult with countries on implementing their tax code, would you ever recommend Canada's approach?
I'm not super familiar with the Canadian context. I hear your frustration, but yes, I think the sheer length of the tax code has been shown by rigorous research that correlates with the extent of tax evasion and complexity. So no, I would prioritize a clear language, simplified solutions, especially for less equipped taxpayers, and more streamlined sort of experience.
Okay, so let's wrap up. If Canada continues with its current approach, which is lots of different complexities in the tax code, the ability for people to file themselves, which promotes a sort of gray market evasion, public and private companies, no government-run tax filing thing, but all the filing done through private companies, billions of dollars spent in tax preparation by the private sector. If Canada continues down that path, given that we were number 3 in the world for digital government in 2010 and we're now number 47, what do you think will happen to Canada's economic competitiveness in the next decade?
Great question, Alistair. I would probably look at examples from beyond Canada. Macro evidence suggests that the easier it is for businesses to operate, to navigate government services, not just tax services, regulation and other and bureaucracy as a whole is a key driver of that country's competitiveness, and that's been proven with numbers from worldwide economies. So yes, I fear it would be detrimental for Canada.
Detrimental sounds like a polite way to say Canada needs to change, but I recognize that you want to make sure you're fair and equitable to all the countries involved in this discussion. Fabrizio, fascinating work that you're doing. I thank you so much for giving us your insight into this. It's very hard to go and find good examples like this when we're researching it. To talk to somebody who's actually seen it across many countries is fantastic. If people want to learn more about what you're doing and the research that you do, what's the best way for them to find out?
Thanks, Alistair. It was great to be here. All of our research is stored and accessible through the webpage of the International Center for Tax and Development, which is the research center where I work at. So www.ictd.ac.uk.
Awesome. And we'll stick those links in the recording so people can follow them as well. Thank you so much for this. If you do pursue any of the research we discussed earlier on about sort of gray areas and economic productivity and the real elephant in the room, which is making tax filing complex for everyone something that serves the interest of the few who want to evade those taxes, I'll be the first to read that report.
Absolutely, Alistair. Thanks for the inspiration.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us on the Functional Government Podcast.